Hi, I'm David Riley,
I'm Nicholas Harvey.
and this is Three Distinct Knocks,
Explain it like I'm 5 edition.
and this one is the Morgan Affair. This episode is brought to you by Masonic Revival, purveyors of great Masonic items, including, I specifically recommend, self-tie bow tie. If you're a Mason, you're a gentleman, and a gentleman knows how to tie a bow tie. Get one and learn.
That's true. Who was Morgan and what was his affair?
We're in the early 1830s, 1834. Morgan shows up in a town called Batavia, New York. And Batavia is sort of a bustling railroad town at this point in time. And Morgan styles himself Captain William Morgan, nothing to do with the rum ball, although he did like to drink a lot. And he said that he was an army captain in the War of 1812. There is no evidence that that is the truth. He said that he was a Mason, and he worked his way into the Batavia Lodge. There is good reason to believe he was a Cowan, that is, someone who pretends to be a Mason by using the secret work in order to fool people. He had a young wife named Lucinda, and he didn't have a job, didn't seem to care to work, didn't seem to care to support himself, and so became dependent on Masonic charity. And for a time, the lodge supported him and his wife. Masonic charity is a thing. We take care of our own.
So he didn't, it was because dues cards didn't exist back then.
Well, dues cards weren't standardized. You can email the Grand Secretary of that state and say, do you have this guy? Communication was a lot laxer. So we have tightened up our security considerably in a lot of ways since then, actually. But yeah. And in part, if you think your Grand Lodge is paranoid about PR issues, when I finish this story, go back and think about it and have a little more sympathy for your Grand Lodge, perhaps. So Morgan, the exact presenting issue is complicated. They wanted to start a Royal Arch chapter in Batavia.
Okay.
And Morgan was on the application for the dispensation. When the charter was returned to Batavia, Morgan's name had been taken off. And we don't know exactly what happened. We think the lodge, either it is the case that members of the lodge, or both things can be true, that members of the lodge became suspicious that he wasn't a bona fide Mason, or they just got sick of him sponging off the lodge and decided he was no longer worthy.
So they created the charter, and then they sent it to who?
To the Grand Chapter of New York.
Okay.
And then when it came back, his name wasn't on it anymore, and so they cut him off from Masonic charity. In any case, whatever happened in that weird little incident that is tantalizing but doesn't tell us much, they cut him off from Masonic charity, and Morgan came back to them and said, if you don't support me and my wife, I'm going to go publish a book that reveals all the secrets of Freemasonry. Now, this is the dumbest threat ever, because this has been done repeatedly since 1717. I think one of the early exposures actually is Three Distinct Knocks, for which this podcast is named.
I would have never agreed to that name if that's who we were after?
Well, it's kind of funny because the main purchaser of Masonic exposures historically have been Masons. Before ciphers were issued by Grand Lodges, a lot of Masons used exposures to memorize the work, right? It made it a lot easier.
Yeah.
So even if you got some parts wrong, you could just fix it along the way. So Morgan finds a printer who's willing to publish his exposure. And he had borrowed a shirt from someone. Presumably, maybe he said he had a job interview, I don't know. Anyway, he borrowed a shirt and failed to return it. So he was arrested for stealing the shirt. And he was held in the sheriff's home. There was a cell in the sheriff's home. This was common back in the day. And he was held in a cell there. And a group of men came to the house and knocked at the door, and the sheriff's wife answered. And she said, they said, we want to bail Morgan out. And she said, well, you're going to have to come back when my husband's home. And one of them stepped forward and said, no, I'm one of the town selectmen. You don't have to wait for your husband. It's okay. Just take the money and give us Morgan. And so the last Morgan is seen, and I put that in quotation marks, is he is being hauled into a carriage, and he's yelling, "Murder! Murder!" And we're pretty sure he was taken to a fort where there was a gunpowder magazine, so a secure room with only one entrance.
Yeah.
And he was held there for a time, and then he disappears. Now, there's a variety of stories of what happened to Morgan at that point. One version of the story is that Morgan is murdered by the Masons. I tend to believe that a group of overenthusiastic Masons probably did Morgan in. That I think the weight of evidence is on that side. An alternative explanation is that Morgan was paid to abandon his wife, which, let's put it this way, she would have not been a great hold over him, even though she was allegedly very attractive and desirable. He didn't show any sign that he cared much about her. And he went to Canada, where he lived out the rest of his life. That's another version of the story. Another version of the story is that he was paid and went to Canada, and from Canada went to the Caribbean, where he was hung for piracy eventually, which is a great version of the story for which there is really little evidence. But whatever happens to Morgan, he disappears. Now, you know how sometimes a news story just blows up?
Yeah.
For no reason you can understand, and suddenly everyone's talking about the kid in the well, right? That's what happened with Morgan. The news story just blew up. Masons kill, veteran, for bravely attempting to expose nefarious secret society. And I think one of the reasons that people were so ripe for this was because Lafayette, the Marquis de Lafayette, had just come back to the United States as the guest of the U.S. Congress. And everywhere Lafayette went, he was, you cannot imagine, the boat that brought him into New York Harbor was greeted by a crowd whose size exceeded the total population of New York City at the time. He was a rock star. Everywhere he went, there were symphonies written, Philadelphia welcomes the hero Lafayette. Everywhere he went. And everywhere he went, there was a Masonic procession. And Lafayette talked about the United States as being the first Masonic republic. He was very proud of his Masonic membership and wanted to be surrounded by his brothers. So Lafayette is this huge hero. And if you go to the Boston Common today, there's a marker on the Common that says, "From this place, the Marquis de Lafayette led a procession to dedicate the Bunker Hill Memorial."
Okay.
Well, what it doesn't say is that was a Masonic procession.
Oh.
The Grand Lodge of Massachusetts is in possession of the silver trowel Lafayette used to lay the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Memorial in a Masonic ceremony. So everyone saw, all the judges, all the legislators, everybody in power at the time was a Mason. If you wore somebody, you wore a Mason. It was. Yeah. And I think it made people nervous. So when Morgan ends up disappearing, there's a groundswell of anti-Masonic fever. And I think it's fair to say, without being contradicted by even the most fervent anti-Mason, that some politicians cynically exploited that, including John Quincy Adams. So it became a part of the presidential politics of the day and the local politics. A third political party in this country was formed called the Anti-Masonic Party. And it stands to this day as the most successful third party in American politics. It took over Vermont. The governor of Vermont and both houses of the Vermont legislature were controlled by the Anti-Masonic Party. And the Grand Lodge of Vermont went dark. Most lodges in the United States do not have a history that extends prior to the 1830s, because lodges went dark by the dozens. Churches were denouncing Masons from the pulpit. Employers were refusing to hire Masons.
Because of Morgan.
Because of Morgan.
Wow.
So if you go to Batavia today, and I have visited it, maybe we'll put a photo of me at his memorial. There's a big Morgan pillar where it talks about, the brave Captain Morgan defending free speech and the right of the people to truth against the secrets of the Freemasons. Yeah. But he was a scoundrel and a con man who was out to blackmail the fraternity to continue to pay him money. His wife, interestingly, we'll talk about another time, but she has her own story, the widow, that's really good. We'll do that next time because that is 11 minutes.